Well, it occurred to me, this is my last sermon while I'm pastor here at Creekside, and that feels okay. My sermon title today is The Cloud of Unknowing, and you probably know that I got that from the idol that said, "To the unknown God." In the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, which is an allegory about God, Susan and Lucy are getting ready to meet Aslan the lion, who represents Christ. Two talking animals, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, prepare the children for the encounter. "Oh," said Susan, "I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall be nervous about meeting a lion." "That you will, dearie," said Mrs. Beaver, "and make no mistake. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without his knees shaking, he's either braver than most or else just silly." "Then he isn't safe," said Lucy. "Safe," said Mr. Beaver. "Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you." If you've read the Narnia series by C.S. Lewis, you know that the lion, Aslan, is grand and noble, good and kind, and he's alive. Not like the gods of the Athenians. Before coming to Athens, Paul had been at Philippi, where his preaching upset the people, and he was thrown in jail along with Silas. Through a miraculous escape, the believers whisked him off to Thessalonica and then to Berea to keep him safe. By the time he got to Athens, for expediency, he was keeping a low profile, waiting for Silas and Timothy to catch up with him. Some would say that Athens was the most glorious city in the world in terms of architecture and history. It was the cultural and intellectual center of the Roman Empire, and besides being the cradle of democracy, it had everything: outstanding temples, artwork, sculptures, orators, mathematicians, philosophers, and astronomers, namely Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Athens was a very religious center. In comparison to 10,000 people who lived in Athens at that time, there were 30,000 idols. That's 3 to 1. The Acropolis was a hill within the city on which sat the Parthenon, and just beyond the Parthenon was a rock about 30 to 40 feet high called the Areopagus, from which you get this breathtaking view of the city. After conversations with people in the marketplace, which is where you went to discuss things, Paul was invited to speak here at the Areopagus to a very curious crowd. Aware of his audience's preferences and prejudices, Paul began by praising them for their spiritual curiosity and wide-ranging search for religious truth. "I've noticed," he said, "that you're very religious, with God's positioned all over the city. I also noticed one that said, 'To the unknown God,' just in case you missed a deity that you didn't know about. Let me tell you about that God, so you can worship him intelligently." Paul knows that even non-believing pagans can see God in part through creation and the laws of natural order. These Athenians have felt the divine presence when studying the orderly assembly of earth and heaven, but attempted to capture and tame that deity in the form of idols. Paul wants them to know that God is alive and active within the world. We are created with a desire to know God, and when we seek God, God can be found. Finally, Paul presents his conclusion, risking rejection by the Athenians. What makes belief in this God different is that he's no longer in our control or manipulation. He requires a leap of faith. The crux of Paul's message to the Athenians was Jesus and the resurrection. God in his power defied death. Jesus, who died, is alive. Paul's sermon brought mixed reaction. Some outright rejected him. Some mocked him. Others were interested in hearing more. And a few joined him and believed. In Acts 17, there are two word pictures that grabbed my attention. Referring to the many idols, Paul said, God doesn't live in shrines made by human hands, or the idols, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything. Interesting to me. God doesn't need anything to make him God. Paul says, God created us with an innate desire for God so that we would search for God and perhaps grope for him and find him, though indeed he's not far from any one of us. In essence, I think the two together say, God doesn't need us to make him God, and God made us to need him. Reference to the unknown God brings to mind a classic that I read at Shalom Institute of Spiritual Formation. The book is titled The Cloud of Unknowing. It was written by an unknown 14th century mystic about the soul's quest for God. There was a time, if I was asked who God is, I might have answered, God is omniscient, God is omnipotent, and God is omnipresent. That is, he's all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-present. I remember being challenged by my brother-in-law about whether God is all-knowing. He argued that a God who gives us choice can't know what choices we'll make in the future, or it really isn't a choice. I argued that if God gave us day-to-day choice, God could know the long-range outcome. I acknowledge that there's a lot about God that I don't understand, and I think I don't need to know it all. I have come to see that our relationship with God is more important than our precise knowledge about God. It's kind of the same as God doesn't need us to make him God. God makes us to need him. And speaking of the cloud of unknowing, there might be some questions that even we, born and raised in the church, may rightfully ponder. Like, how much does God know about the future? Is God in control? Does he have a perfect plan for all of us? Some of you have seen The Shack that's in the theater right now. I read an interesting article by the author of that book. He says, we are control freaks who want to control everything around us so that things we fear won't happen. Young says, control is a myth. We know that one rogue cell or another person's choices can change the direction of our lives. Something goes horribly wrong, like when a car passes the road in front of a motorcycle and the motorcyclist is killed. Even though well-intentioned and perhaps reassuring, it feels a little crass to say it must be part of God's plan, or God must know what he's doing. Young says, yes, God has the creative audacity to build purpose out of the evil we create, but that will never justify what is wrong. Here's another piece of his logic. Does God have a wonderful plan for our lives? A perfect plan that requires a perfect response? What if this is about a God who has greater respect for you than for a plan? What if there is no plan for your life, but rather a relationship in which God constantly invites us to co-create respectfully submitting to the choices we bring to the table. A true creator knows he not only has to shape, but endorse and allow. Wisdom allows things to grow and unfold. Love and relationship trump control every time. Forced love is no love at all. We may come out at different places than Young did, but what is important to know, to think about, is what would shake your belief in God if you knew that some of your established beliefs might be questioned? What would shake your belief in God? If God can't know the future or is in complete control or has a perfect plan for us because he chose to give us freedom, would that change or threaten your faith? It's okay not to have every belief nailed down tight. Perhaps there are some expectations about God that we need to hold lightly. Our relationship with God is in progress, and we continue to learn. What Paul wanted the Athenians to know is it's all about Christ and the power of the resurrection, because Christ is alive. Even one of our hymns, our favorite hymns, acknowledges we don't know everything about God, but affirms that we know who we believe in. I know not why God's wondrous grace to me he has made known, nor why unworthy Christ in love redeemed me for his own. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. I know not how this saving grace to me he did impart, nor how believing in his word brought peace within my heart. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed against him, unto him against that day. I encourage us to keep pondering who God is. If you seek me, you will find me. To hold lightly what we don't understand. God is not served by human hands. And to allow God to be God. In him we live and move and have our being. Paul admonishes us in Colossians 1:10, lead lives worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, as you bear fruit in every good work, and as you grow in the knowledge of God. Amen.